Good morning, students. Today we will start the ionic equilibrium. Already we have done about chemical equilibrium. Now you should know what is ionic equilibrium. Before starting ionic equilibrium, first time you have to know about electrolyte. Do you know what are electrolyte? Electrolyte means those substance which can produce ions in solution and which can conduct electricity. I mean, the substances which can produce ions in solution and conduct electricity. For example, acid, base, salt, they act as electrolyte. So what are electrolyte? For example, suppose this is a container and the container contains some amount of water. If you dissolve sodium chloride, this is one example of salt. When you dissolve sodium chloride in water, then the sodium chloride undergo dissociation and it produces Na plus ion and Cl minus ion. This type of substance which can produce ions, positive ion and negative ions in solution, this type of substances are said to be the electrolyte. And when it produces ions in solution, if you want to pass electricity through the solution, then the electricity will pass through the solution due to the movement of ions. I mean, when you pass electricity, then the ions will move, and due to this movement of ions inside the solution can conduct electricity. Similarly, if you apply some acid like hydrochloric acid will produce H plus ion and Cl minus ion. So hydrochloric acid is also one example of your electrolyte. So the substances which can produce positive and negative ions in solution and the substances which can conduct electricity in solution, this type of substances are called electrolyte. Normally all acid, all bases, salt, they act as electrolyte because they can produce ions in solution. Now there are two types of electrolyte. Some electrolytes are called strong electrolyte. There are two types of electrolytes. Some electrolytes are called strong electrolyte and some electrolytes are called weak electrolyte. There are two types of electrolyte. Strong electrolyte means strong acid, strong base, some amount of salt, they act as strong electrolyte. These are the example of strong electrolyte. And weak electrolyte example, you can consider some weak acid, weak base. This will act as weak electrolyte. So there are two types of electrolyte. Some electrolytes are called strong electrolyte and some electrolytes are called weak electrolyte. Normally strong acid like hydrochloric acid, nitric acid, sulfuric acid, this type of acid act as strong electrolyte. Similarly, strong base like sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, these are strong base, they act as strong electrolyte. Some salt also like sodium chloride, potassium chloride, this type of salt also act as strong electrolyte. Similarly, some weak acid, for example acetic acid, oxalic acid, this type of acids are weak acid and this type of acid act as weak electrolyte. Similarly, weak base like ammonium hydroxide, calcium hydroxide, these are weak bases and that's why they are considered as weak electrolyte. I mean, strong acid, strong base act as strong electrolyte and weak acid, weak base act as weak electrolyte. And another point of difference between strong electrolyte and weak electrolyte, when you dissolve some strong electrolyte in water, the electrolyte undergo completely dissociation. I mean, suppose this is HCl, it is one example of strong acid, I mean it acts as strong electrolyte. When you dissolve in water, suppose the container contains water, if you dissolve in water, suppose you have dissolved 100 molecules of HCl, if all the 100 molecules of HCl undergo breaking, to produce 100 H plus ion and 100 Cl minus ion, then this type of electrolytes are said to be strong electrolyte. I mean the electrolyte which ionize completely, that type of electrolytes are called strong electrolyte. And in case of weak, for example, suppose acetic acid is one of the weak electrolytes, CH3COH. If you want to dissolve acetic acid in water, suppose you have dissolved 100 molecules of acetic acid. If you dissolve in water, then all the 100 molecules do not undergo dissociation. Among this 100, a little amount of molecule undergo dissociation. And this type of electrolyte is said to be the weak electrolyte. I mean, the electrolyte which ionize completely in solution, that type of electrolyte are said to be strong electrolyte. And those electrolyte which are partially ionized in solution, they are said to be the weak electrolyte. That is why when you dissolve some strong acid, strong bases in water, then it undergo complete ionization, and that is why strong acid, strong base act as strong electrolyte. Similarly, if you dissolve some weak acid, weak bases in water, then they are partially ionized. That is why weak acid, weak base are considered as weak electrolyte. Now, in case of strong electrolyte, since all the molecules undergo dissociation, there will be no undissociated molecule. But in case of weak electrolyte, when you dissolve this, suppose there are 100 acetic acid molecule. When you dissolve it, suppose from 100, 5 molecules undergo dissociation. Then it will form 5 CH3CO minus ion and 5 H plus ion. Acetic acid undergo decomposition to produce acetate ion and hydrogen ion. So you have dissolved 100, among the 100, only 5 molecules undergo dissociation. And another 95 molecule remain as undissociated molecule CH3COOH. So that is why the difference between strong and weak is, in case of strong electrolyte, inside the solution you will get only ions, you don't get any undissociated electrolyte, all are dissociated. But in case of weak electrolyte, you will get some dissociated ions and some undissociated molecules also. I mean, some part will break and some part will not break. So that is why the solution contains some dissociated ion and some undissociated molecule. Now when the solution contains some dissociated ion and undissociated molecule, then some equilibrium is attained between the dissociated ions and the undissociated molecule, and that type of equilibrium is said to be the ionic equilibrium. So ionic equilibrium will be exist in case of weak electrolyte. I mean, in the solution, acetic acid CH3COH produce CH3COO minus and H plus ion, and there is an equilibrium between this undissociated acetic acid and the dissociated ions, and this equilibrium is said to be the ionic equilibrium. So this equilibrium exists in case of weak electrolyte. Have you got it? What is the difference between strong and weak electrolyte? In case of strong electrolyte, when you dissolve in water, the strong electrolyte undergo completely dissociation, and that is why if it is 100% strong, then it will 100% ionize and there will be no undissociated molecule inside the solution. All you will get as ions. But in case of weak electrolyte, whether it is acid or base, if it is weak, when you dissolve in water, it do not undergo complete ionization. A little part of the molecule undergo ionization and maximum of molecule remain as undissociated. So since the solution contain dissociated ion and some undissociated molecule also, so an equilibrium is attained between the ions and the undissociated molecule, and this equilibrium is called ionic equilibrium. And secondly, here you have dissolved 100 molecules of acetic acid. Among that 100, how much dissociated? Only 5 molecule undergo dissociation. So how much part of the molecule undergo dissociation? That is called degree of dissociation, and that degree of dissociation is represented by alpha symbol. I mean, if from 100, how many molecules undergo dissociation? 5. I mean, the degree of dissociation alpha, here it should be 5(1) because 5 molecules undergo dissociation. But the degree of dissociation, it always measured as a fraction. I mean, the total is considered as 1. Among 1, how much undergo breaking? That is called alpha. Suppose you have dissolved some molecule and among that molecule 50% undergo ionization, then the alpha value will be half. 50% means half, like that. If 25% undergo dissociation, it will be 1/4 like this. So alpha value, that if in case of strong electrolyte, since it is completely ionized, that is why in case of strong the alpha value is considered as 1. I mean it undergo complete ionization. But in case of weak electrolyte, a little fraction of molecule undergo dissociation. So how much fraction of molecule undergo dissociation, that is represented by alpha, and which is called degree of dissociation or degree of ionization for the electrolyte.